We all know that predictions are difficult to make, particularly about the future. But Grant Thompson, last night, stepped into the breach, and we just heard Pierre now as well, talking about a number for the future in terms of investment, and the possibility that there could be $10 billion worth of investment in our sector in the coming years. That's an exciting proposition. How do we get there? So we'll be looking to some of our panelists for answers to that. So with that, I will introduce our three panelists. First, Graeme Flint, who's the VP Olefins Business Development with Nova Chemicals in Calgary, born in South London in the UK. His chemical engineering degree from Bath University. Worked for Esso Chemicals fairly briefly, but then with Nova Chemicals or predecessor companies since the early 80s, largely in the olefins business area. Andy Lacara, Senior VP Operations Canexus, born north of New Orleans, about an hour north of New Orleans, and his engineering technology degree was from Oklahoma State, which makes you a cowboy. International Paper was where he spent most of his career in the US and also in Europe, in Belgium, and in Sweden as well. Leadership roles ranging from HR to plant manager. Joined Canexus in 2009 and current role in 2010. And finally, Kevin Henderson, who's the Vice President of Global Manufacturing for Methanex, born in Medicine Hat, Alberta. Took business at Simon Fraser and has spent 38 years in the petrochemical industry, starting with Alberta Gas Chemicals, then Novacor Chemicals, where we actually crossed paths, and Methanex. So with that, let's start with the blank sheet of paper question. If you were starting from scratch, what would your company be looking for in order to invest in Canada? And Andy, let's start with you.
When one is thinking of a project, they do start with the thinking phase, then it goes to the planning phase, and then it goes to the execution phase. And so whenever a company goes through a process of trying to decide where to place investment dollars, and the audience right now is made up of multinationals and Canadian, heavy Canadian manufacturing companies, a mixture of thinkers in that area, then you look for 2 or 3 different elements. And in that thinking phase of the project, there has to be a welcoming attitude. What's the permitting process? And what's the process of integrating into the community? What's the progress, like in our case in North Vancouver, where we have to think heavily about growth to that particular facility, further investment, and what is the community view of that investment? And then finally, when you go through the planning and execution stage, actually execution is the hard, easy part. It's easy because you know where your plans are, but it becomes more difficult when you look for quality of craftsmen and tradesmen, quality of engineering firms. A lot of us struggle with the difference between the competency of an engineering firm in predicting what's to come about versus the actual cost of construction and bringing the project to completion. So when you're looking for an investment in mainly a region of the country, you're trying to find a healthy balance between all the elements it takes to bring off a project in a successful way.
Interesting. That welcoming attitude is an interesting idea. Kevin, what about Methanex? What do you look for?
Well, I think first off, it's market opportunity. I think, you know, where do we see market growth and how can we best serve that marketplace? So I think that sets the stage, and then we'll look for location. And location will be a number of different things, and I think Andy touched on a few of them. I think also feedstock. Is there feedstock advantage? What's the supply chain look like getting the material to the marketplace? And then sort of goes into sort of the things that Andy talked about, the actual project itself and cost structure. What's it look like from a regulatory perspective? What's the community like? What's the community do they want to be there? So I think it covers all those bases.
We all had a very different view about the possibility of growth in Canada. So what among those factors has changed? There are obviously some big ticket items, but what has changed that has caused us to perceive this opportunity? Maybe we'll start with you, Kevin.
I think the big thing is shale gas and feedstock advantage in North America right now. And I think the other thing is the global environment. There's North America is seen as a secure location for investment. And as we have been expanding globally, as we left North America, we've seen the uncertainty going to other countries, and an opportunity to come back with a secure supply of feedstock is probably the number one thing.
Graeme?
Yeah, I agree very much with Kevin. Shale gas and shale oil explosion has occurred in the US. It's given access to significant and growing supplies of cost competitive ethane supply, allows for ethylene and polyethylene facilities to be built in North America. When you look at globally, the cost competitiveness of the facilities globally, obviously the Middle East is still by far the most cost competitive, but their ethane supply is drying up. There is not the same degree of opportunity that used to exist through the 70s and 80s in the Middle East that were there during that time period. North America was getting to be just competitive with Europe and Asia based on crude oil-based feedstocks. But now the availability of ethane in particular and the ability of the industry to retool itself and expand based on those growing supplies of ethane resulted in North America being probably the second most competitive area of feedstock supply, and therefore ethylene and polyethylene in the country.
Your business is a little different, Mandy.
Yes, I guess I'll speak generally. The other evolution, big point in my mind, is the fact that society, communities, governments are waking up to the fact that you have to make something. You can't just sell services all the time. You have to be in a position to, you want some manufacturing in your community. You want it done properly, you want it done safely, you don't want it to stink, but at the same time you have to figure out a way to have that, because otherwise, as we see in different provinces in Canada, everything can't be totally green all the time and still have a balance to the industrial environment. So when we talk to local leaders about new projects or rehabilitation of older parts of our facilities, we're seeing a bit of a change in that, with the minor exception of maybe British Columbia.
I suspect that folks in some other provinces might say that their province is having a little difficulty waking up as well. So to that point, you get to change one thing. Everything's not perfect in Canada. You get to change one thing. A policy, a practice, maybe a person, a program, a cultural norm in the country. What would you change in order to facilitate this growth? Graeme, let's start with you.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. And I think the most important thing I can come up with is getting government and society to recognize that value creation opportunity. Coming from Alberta, the way we do, we've got huge resource endowment, huge resource potential. And there's industries that are there buying land positions, developing those resources, and just looking for markets. But they're just looking at exporting the raw material, doing the minimum amount of processing to meet a certain product specification that can then be shipped by pipeline, rail, shipped out to export markets. And those products then go to regions like Europe, Asia, and into the US, where further value is added to those molecules to produce products that you and I would use: gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and obviously petrochemical derivatives like polyethylene and polypropylene, etc. So that value creation ends up happening, and job creation and tax revenue ends up happening abroad as opposed to the opportunity of doing that in Canada. And getting government to recognise the opportunity and to facilitate the investment that our industry can do by creating that value is the biggest thing I want to change.
Okay. Value-added recognition. Andy, how about you?
I would change the viewpoint that you can shift your needs to acquire more revenue as a government. You can shift it from society in general to industry only. And our company right now is facing a fair amount of electricity cost increases nearly across Canada as it relates to the semi-government controlled public utilities trying to make up for shortfalls elsewhere because they're looking at companies with very deep pockets. One of the things they're confusing is the difference between a multinational worldwide company profitability structure and what's going on with the local facility in the province. And that's creating a bit of a sticker shock when it comes to what's being communicated to us right now from the standpoint of the rise of electricity prices that are anticipated. In that example, Canada will no longer be a low-cost electricity producer.
And which jurisdictions in particular do you think?
I'm speaking of, across, yeah, Quebec's doing it, Manitoba's doing it, as well as British Columbia, where we have our clusters of manufacturing activity.
Okay, Kevin, what one thing do you want to change?
I'm probably aligned a little bit with Graeme. I think the upstream sector tends to market their product on a view of export. And I think there's an opportunity for them to look for upgrading that product within Canada. And I think they have to work harder. They have to start working at actually trying to market their product in Canada and look for different ways of selling their product rather than just on a strip type basis. And I think if we can get that shift to start to take place, you'll start to see more projects take place because you'll be able to get some security of supply, and that's really the thing that holds back a lot of projects.
So, the industry does well in a variety of places around the world. Who gets us? Who's a good model that when we're talking to public officials, we could say, look at country X because they understand the industry, they appreciate it, and they get the benefits from the industry. Who would you point?
Texas.
Texas, thank you. The nation state of Texas.
It was a republic at one time.
It still has the option. Retains the option.
You go to a football game there, they do the national anthem, and then they sing the Texas anthem. The whole state.
Anywhere other than Texas?
It's a struggle. Back to my electricity example, in various places around the world, there was a big push to use less electricity, and consumers did that. But now the utilities don't have as much sales as they used to, so the unit costs go up, and they have to raise the prices. And so we see that in Brazil also, actually. That same thing's taking place. It's kind of happening in Canada from the electricity standpoint.
We have an Alberta government that is striving to add value and get the resources developed in the province, and yet it's still not happening compared to the Gulf Coast. And I wonder what you would say about that.
I'd say it is happening. The programs that the Alberta government has put in place have been successful. And the incremental ethane extraction program is one example of a program the Alberta government has facilitated. It's a $350 million program that's now fully subscribed. Results in incremental ethane being produced in the province that wouldn't necessarily otherwise be produced, and allows for the types of investments that Nova's putting in place at our Joffrey site. The BRIC program, Rigid Royalty in Kind program, is another example of what the Alberta government is prepared to do with their equity barrels of bitumen. They dedicate those to an upgrading facility in the province to produce diesel out of the bitumen barrel. I think the problem the Alberta government has got is, one, obviously balancing the books, because all of that, the IEP program is royalty-based, where the royalty on ethane is then dedicated back to the extraction facilities for them to be built, where those revenues would otherwise have gone into general revenues. So balancing the books is a challenge for the Alberta government. And it's a bit of, you wouldn't believe the problems the Alberta government had with their bitumen royalty in kind, where the industry viewed the government as meddling in their industry. You can only point to the need for that facility today when you've got Alberta bitumen being discounted by up to $30 a barrel from Western Texas Intermediate crude oil price, for that type of facility to be needed in Alberta to provide additional markets for that bitumen production. So I think that the Alberta government does get the message. Their challenge is coming up with programs and funding those programs that result in the types of investments that they would want to see happen.
Mr. Pedrusny.
You mentioned the Texas example. What about the Louisiana example?
Kevin?
Yeah. I think Louisiana is a great place to do business. I think the government there is extremely open and inviting to new business. And of course, we're moving plants there today. The government is open door, the community is open door. They help you through the whole process. From an environmental perspective, they're easy to work with, easier than Texas right now. So Louisiana probably leads Texas right now for investment.
Let me ask about responsible care. We heard Mike and Richard talking about the evolution of responsible care right now. How important is leadership in responsible care for Canada to this opportunity, to seizing the opportunity? Do we need to be a leader in responsible care globally? Andy, let's start with you.
I think the processes that Canada has created since the beginning already places it in a heavy leadership role. But as time has evolved, and be careful here with my words, in some areas Canada has become less relevant once the process got rolling on its own. So I would argue for Canada or the CIAC to invest a huge amount of resources in trying to lead further than what already exists would not be a strong value add type thought process. But what Canada is doing that's so great, and as exhibited by the CIAC's thought process of evolution, is figuring out ways to continuously to inject parts and pieces that the rest of the world will pick up on, like the sustainability piece. One of my criticisms of the ACC process, having gone through certifications in both regions, is that they're very much following an enforcement type mentality as part of the audit process when the consultants come in to have the audit. They don't really challenge the company to think beyond that. And for the chemistry industry, it's incredibly important that we go beyond enforcement, because the public right now expects us to perform to a certain level at the and not deal with enforcement issues. We have to educate them on how we can go further and why the chemical industry is elemental to making that happen, because it goes into other areas. We hosted a discussion with the Pipeline Association. They are so far behind when it comes to responsible care thinking that it's no wonder they're facing the issues they are. So that part should continue, but to try to run out and become a world leader beyond where I would, if I'm understanding you correctly, I wouldn't put any more resources into that.
Okay. Kevin, what do you think?
Well, I think responsible care and sustainability has served us well as a company, Methanex, as we've moved around the globe. In every country we've gone into, it's helped to open the door for us when we talk about responsible care and our business practices and how we do business. It's made it easier for us to get into countries and to get an audience and to eventually develop projects. And then responsible care starts to take hold from our introduction of it into countries around the world. So New Zealand as an example, and then Trinidad, and now Egypt. So I think that responsible care has served us well as we go global. So I think it still has a place.
Graeme?
Yeah, I'd agree with Kevin very much, and Andy for that matter, but One of the areas that responsible care is going to be critically important going forward is in working against this product deselection movement. We've seen recently where McDonald's have decided to move to a paper type of cup as opposed to a polystyrene cup. And it's all related to the perception that polystyrene is a worse product environmentally than paper. But if you do the life cycle analysis, it's probably the opposite. So the sustainability part of responsible care is going to be critically important as we start fighting against these types of product deselection movements. You know, the grocery sack in many cities is not the product, it's not a problem with the product, it's a problem with what people do with that product. And if it was only reused and recycled, then it would be a much better product than the alternative being a paper-based product.
Okay. Other questions? David.
Thank you. How important do you perceive regulatory certainty or perhaps uncertainty as a factor in considering growth and growth locations, perhaps in, for example, environmental areas?
Kevin. Whoop.
Go ahead.
Andy's. Go ahead.
Andy wants to jump in.
Andy, well, you can take it if you want, but you know, when we take a project to the board, we have to have regulatory certainty. We have to have feedstock nailed down. We have to know where we are with regard to all our permits and everything's in place in order to move forward. And whenever you have uncertainty, a project will stop at the board, and there will be no further investment. And as you delay a project, there's other projects that are on the table that are waiting to move forward in other countries, other jurisdictions, and when you stop something, the momentum stops and something else can take its place, and you can lose an opportunity. So regulatory certainty is extremely important to move a project forward.
Any different views?
I would like to add that we have to help the regulatory thought process evolve, because what you said is very true, but it's also very traditional in the sense of it's been true for decades. What we're finding now as we talk about evolving current facilities into other products, some of the regulators are torn. They're giving you certainty. The certainty's not good because it's basically a no to something that needs to start evolving into a version of yes. Because in theory, you can have absolute certainty, it's always no, and you never go forward. So we face the challenge of responsible care, and the thought processes of sustainability have evolved quite heavily. Now we have to open the new frontier, because now you find regulatory conflicts. You can be, what should I say, clear and certain with a no answer. You can start opening your thought processes to new technology. It's part of what's driving the fracking industry crazy at the moment. As regulations exist, the uncertainty exists in different areas of North America. But then we have to figure out, how do we help them get to yes? And what do we show them? Because a small example, we were talking to the regulators in British Columbia about future projects that would stop us, or allow us to stop liquefying chlorine, which is a much, much safer place to be in the future than where we are today. However, it conflicted with greenhouse gas current theories. And so they were stymied. So it was easier to say no from a greenhouse gas viewpoint than it was to get to yes in another area of incredible importance.
Interesting. Is there anything that you can think of that we as an industry should be doing in that regard to help that evolution of the dialogue that you're describing?
Yeah, and it kind of links to what Graeme was saying about somehow we got going years ago that paper was better than plastic because it had some version of biodegradability than plastic. But the fact is, you take a newspaper, put it in a landfill, it'll still be there 100 years from now. And I came from the paper industry. We were the ones who were pushing this idea that paper was better than plastic.
Well done.
We need to keep pushing the concept of true science and realities versus this viewpoints we get, like, is it better to throw a piece of paper out the window or a plastic bag out the window? Well, let's throw neither out the window type of thinking.
Graeme, anything to
No, I
add to
don't
that
think
one?
it could add anything.
Other questions? I have the sleepless night question. So how could we screw this up? We've got a $10 billion bogey out there. We've got this enormous opportunity, all of these positive trends that are going on, all of this energy and human resources. What could screw that up for us?
Unfortunate public perception events that really get us tangled up in our collective arguments. This unfortunate event in Quebec, if you go to what's been published as some of the root cause areas, that things you can read in the newspaper, it's amazing that it could materialize with that combination of events to allow that to happen, but it's completely distracted away from the realities of what happens 99.999% of the rest of the workday and of society's day. Things like that will just cripple us because we'll find ourselves involved in time-consuming, expensive discussions that are not really relevant to the true future of society.
Graeme?
One thing that does come to mind for me is something that Grant alluded to yesterday. 7 years ago, if you were to say we're going to be investing $1 billion in a new polyethylene plant at Joffrey based on ethane supply, I'd say, well, where are you coming from? Because the competitors in North America and the availability of feedstock was a very negative viewpoint. We fast forward to now, and then we say, well, we couldn't have anticipated that 7 years ago because of the application of new technology that has driven the availability of shale gas and the feedstocks that come from it. But many of the investments in North America are all predicated on the assumption that the margin between crude oil and gas remain very wide. And if new technology is applied to crude oil production elsewhere that has been sort of a feature of North American production, that dynamic can change very quickly. And the economics of all those investments in a very high capital cost environment within North America can have a very negative impact on the expected return on that investment.
Right. Kevin?
I'd agree with Andy around some type of unfortunate event could impact us considerably and would give me sleepless nights. But from an industry perspective, our industry, I think a rapid increase in LNG exports off the continent could change our feedstock advantage and reverse us 10 years. And I think you would see investment dry up pretty quickly from that. Mm-hmm. So I think any LNG exports have to be gradual, controlled, and look at the overall effects to the overall economy and downstream while that's taking place.
Okay. Last question for you. We've talked about a number of stakeholders here. Which one would you say the industry needs to focus on more in order to enable this future, in order to seize the opportunity? Graeme?
I'd say I think we need to focus on the public in general. We talked about here about potential negative impact of incidents that have occurred. If we do suffer a major incident within our industry, then we're going to have to deal with that. Getting the public to recognize the job creation benefits, the tax revenue benefits, and the product benefits that our industry provides to our customers as well is something that I don't think is very well understood by the public itself. So earning that public right to operate, to be in business is where we should be focusing our efforts.
Okay. Kevin, which stakeholder?
I'd agree with Graeme, and I think I would add, I don't think there's any one stakeholder. I think it's a large group. you know, it's not only the public needs to understand the industry more, I think the upstream sector has to, I think railroads, pipelines.
Upstream sector meaning?
Oil and gas in our industry.
Okay.
Railroads, pipelines, government. I think everybody has to understand that it's a supply chain of all the entities, and if any one of them is not part of it, it won't work and it won't function, because growth opportunities are offshore, and we have to get our product to that marketplace.
Right. Andy?
Yeah, at the risk of it being an argument like which one of your kids is more important, it's a struggle. I would argue a focus point needs to be the government stakeholder, but government in a state of stalemate. Governments who 50-50 are in a state of not getting very much accomplished and having to argue over everything incessantly. That adds time to our decision making. That adds risk to the certainty of the outcome of projects. And that particular stakeholder, and especially in the U.S. environment, and I've been learning the last 4 years the intricacies of the Canadian provincial versus federal, and there's a lot of stalemate going on, and we need to keep focused on that particular stakeholder in that way, I would argue.
Great. Any other questions from the group?
It was interesting knowing the I'm going to ask a question on stakeholders. There was either an avoidance of or the forgetting of the shareholders. Any comments?
Did you forget about your shareholders, guys?
No, you have your customers, you have your community, you have your shareholders, and that's why I made the comment about which one of the kids is more important. You run the risk when you try to choose one. But the shareholders, through the board and through Paul, I would argue that the shareholders seem to have, as boards get more involved in management of companies, become more activist, one could argue the shareholders' views are very well looked after. And now I'm speaking from the standpoint of a Canadian company with a Canadian board. Everybody sits in Calgary, nearly everyone, a few Americans on it. There's quite a bit of shareholder representation going on in our particular company. I'll let the bigger multinationals comment on further.
And with different configurations.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, Nova is a privately held entity owned by the state of Abu Dhabi. We have the luxury of knowing that our owners, our shareholders, are very much aligned with what the company wants to achieve. We don't have to convince the public as a shareholder that what we want to do is the right thing to do. They acquired Nova Chemicals for a specific purpose to get exposure to the North American business environment, particularly and access to our technology. And what we're delivering to them now is very much what they expected to be able to achieve by acquiring us in the first place.
Yeah, I would say our board is very aligned with our growth objectives and also the growth in a sustainable way and in a responsible way. So, you know, our board is a big believer in responsible care ethic, and any opportunity that we have is going to have to meet that obligation.
But Paul, can we go back to you? Maybe we're missing something. Did you have additional views on?
All right. Well, on that note, I think we're going to be rolling into a break, but let's thank Kevin, Andy, and Graeme for their participation in the panel.